Chapter 34 of The Pearl of Orr's Island. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget Gage. The Pearl of Orr's Island by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Chapter 34. Friends. The quilting broke up at the primitive hour of 9 o'clock, at which, in early New England days, all social gatherings always dispersed. Captain Kittridge rowed his helpmeet with Mara and Sally across the bay to the island. "Come and stay with me to-night, Sally," said Mara. "I think Sally had best be at home," said Mrs. Kittridge. "There's no sense in girls talking all night." "There ain't sense in nothin' else, mother," said the captain. "Next to sparkin', which is the Christianest thing I knows on, comes gals talkin' 'bout their sparks. They's as natural as crow's foot and red columbines in the spring, and spring don't come but once a year neither, and so let 'em take the comfort on't. I warrant now, Polly, you've laid awake nights and talked about me." "We've all been foolish once," said Mrs. Kittridge. "Well, mother, we want to be foolish too," said Sally. "Well, you and your father are too much for me," said Mrs. Kittridge, plaintively. "You always get your own way." "How lucky that my way is always a good one," said Sally. "Well, you know, Sally, you are going to make the beer to-morrow," still objected her mother. "Oh, yes, that's another reason," said Sally. "Mara and I shall come home through the woods in the morning, and we can get whole apronfuls of young wintergreen. And besides, I know where there's a lot of sassafras root. We'll dig it, won't we, Mara?" "Yes, and I'll come down and help you brew," said Mara. "Don't you remember the beer I made when Moses came home?" "Yes, yes, I remember," said the captain. "You sent us a couple of bottles." "We can make better yet now," said Mara. "The wintergreen is young, and the green tips on the spruce boughs are so full of strength. Everything is lively and sunny now." "Yes, yes," said the captain, "and I 'spect I know why things do look pretty lively to some folks, don't they?" "I don't know what sort of work you'll make of the beer among you," said Mrs. Kittridge, "but you must have it your own way." Mrs. Kittridge, who never did anything else among her tea-drinking acquaintances but laud and magnify Sally's good traits and domestic acquirements, felt constantly bound to keep up a faint show of controversy and authority in her dealings with her, the fading remains of the strict government of her childhood. But it was nevertheless very perfectly understood, in a general way, that Sally was to do as she pleased; and so, when the boat came to shore, she took the arm of Mara and started up toward the brown house. The air was soft and balmy, and though the moon by which the troth of Mara and Moses had been plighted had waned into the latest hours of the night, still 1,000 stars were lying in twinkling brightness, reflected from the undulating waves all around them, and the tide, as it rose and fell, made a sound as gentle and soft as the respiration of a peaceful sleeper. "Well, Mara," said Sally, after an interval of silence, "all has come out right. You see that it was you whom he loved. What a lucky thing for me that I am made so heartless, or I might not be as glad as I am." "You are not heartless, Sally," said Mara. "It's the enchanted princess asleep; the right one hasn't come to waken her." "Maybe so," said Sally, with her old light laugh. "If I only were sure he would make you happy now, half as happy as you deserve, I'd forgive him his share of this summer's mischief. The fault was just half mine, you see, for I witched with him. I confess it. I have my own little spider webs for these great lordly flies, and I like to hear them buzz." "Take care, Sally, never do it again, or the spider web may get round you," said Mara. "Never fear me," said Sally. "But, Mara, I wish I felt sure that Moses could make you happy. Do you really, now, when you think seriously, feel as if he would?" "I never thought seriously about it," said Mara, "but I know he needs me, that I can do for him what no one else can. I have always felt all my life that he was to be mine, that he was sent to me, ordained for me to care for and to love." "You are well mated," said Sally. "He wants to be loved very much, and you want to love. There's the active and passive voice, as they used to say at Miss Plucher's. But yet in your natures you are opposite as any two could well be." Mara felt that there was in these chance words of Sally more than she perceived. No one could feel as intensely as she could that the mind and heart so dear to her were yet, as to all that was most vital and real in her inner life, unsympathizing. To her the spiritual world was a reality, God an ever-present consciousness, and the line of this present life seemed so to melt and lose itself in the anticipation of a future and brighter one, that it was impossible for her to speak intimately and not unconsciously to betray the fact. To him there was only the life of this world, there was no present God, and from all thought of a future life he shrank with a shuddering aversion, as from something ghastly and unnatural. She had realized this difference more in the few days that followed her betrothal than all her life before, for now first the barrier of mutual constraint and misunderstanding having melted away, each spoke with an abandon and unreserve which made the acquaintance more vitally intimate than it ever had been before. It was then that Mara felt that while her sympathies could follow him through all his plans and interests, there was a whole world of thought and feeling in her heart where his could not follow her, and she asked herself, would it be so always? Must she walk at his side forever repressing the utterance of that which was most sacred and intimate, living in a nominal and external communication only? How could it be that what was so lovely and clear in its reality to her, that which was to her as life-blood, that which was the vital air in which she lived and moved and had her being, could be absolutely nothing to him? Was it really possible, as he said, that God had no existence for him except in a nominal, cold belief, that the spiritual world was to him only a land of pale shades and doubtful glooms, from which he shrank with dread, and the least allusion to which was distasteful? And would this always be so? And if so, could she be happy? But Mara said the truth in saying that the question of personal happiness never entered her thoughts. She loved Moses in a way that made it necessary to her happiness to devote herself to him, to watch over and care for him, and though she knew not how, she felt a sort of presentiment that it was through her that he must be brought into sympathy with a spiritual and immortal life. All this passed through Mara's mind in the reverie into which Sally's last words threw her, as she sat on the door-sill and looked off into the starry distance, and heard the weird murmur of the sea. "How lonesome the sea at night always is," said Sally. "I declare, Mara, I don't wonder you miss that creature, for, to tell the truth, I do a little bit. It was something, you know, to have somebody to come in, and to joke with, and to say how he liked one's hair and one's ribbons, and all that. I quite got up a friendship for Moses, so that I can feel how dull you must be." And Sally gave a half sigh, and then whistled a tune as adroitly as a blackbird. "Yes," said Mara, "we two girls down on this lonely island need some one to connect us with the great world, and he was so full of life, and so certain and confident. He seemed to open a way before one out into life." "Well, of course, while he is gone there will be plenty to do getting ready to be married," said Sally. "By the by, when I was over to Portland the other day, Maria Potter showed me a new pattern for a bed-quilt, the sweetest thing you can imagine. It is called the Morning Star. There is a great star in the center, and little stars all around, white on a blue ground. I mean to begin one for you." "I am going to begin spinning some very fine flax next week," said Mara. "And have I shown you the new pattern I drew for a counterpane? It is to be morning glories, leaves and flowers, you know. A pretty idea, isn't it?" And so, the conversation falling from the region of the sentimental to the practical, the two girls went in and spent an hour in discussions so purely feminine that we will not enlighten the reader further therewith. Sally seemed to be investing all her energies in the preparation of the wedding outfit of her friend, about which she talked with a constant and restless activity, and for which she formed 1,000 plans and projected shopping tours to Portland, Brunswick, and even to Boston, this last being about as far off a venture at that time as Paris now seems to a Boston belle. "When you are married," said Sally, "you'll have to take me to live with you. That creature shan't have you all to himself. I hate men, they are so exorbitant, They spoil all our playmates. And what shall I do when you are gone?" "You will go with Mr. what's his name?" said Mara. "Pshaw! I don't know him. I shall be an old maid," said Sally. And really there isn't much harm in that, if one could have company, if somebody or other wouldn't marry all one's friends. "That's lonesome," she said, winking a tear out of her black eyes and laughing. "If I were only a young fellow now, Mara, I'd have you myself, and that would be just the thing. And I'd shoot Moses if he said a word, and I'd have money, and I'd have honors, and I'd carry you off to Europe and take you to Paris and Rome, and nobody knows where, and we'd live in peace, as the story books say." "Come, Sally, how wild you are talking," said Mara, "and the clock has just struck 1. Let's try to go to sleep." Sally put her face to Mara's and kissed her, and Mara felt a moist spot on her cheek. Could it be a tear? End of chapter 34. Chapter 35 of The Pearl of Orr's Island. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget Gage. The Pearl of Orr's Island by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Chapter 35. The Toothacre Cottage. Aunt Roxy and Aunt Ruey Toothacre lived in a little one-story gambrel-roofed cottage, on the side of Harpswell Bay, just at the head of the long cove which we have already described. The windows on 2 sides commanded the beautiful bay and the opposite shores, and on the other they looked out into the dense forest, through whose deep shadows of white birch and pine the silver rise and fall of the sea daily revealed itself. The house itself was a miracle of neatness within, for the 2 thrifty sisters were worshippers of soap and sand, and these 2 tutelary deities had kept every board of the house floor white and smooth, and also every table and bench and tub of household use. There was a sacred care over each article, however small and insignificant, which composed their slender household stock. The loss or breakage of one of them would have made a visible crack in the hearts of the worthy sisters, for every plate, knife, fork, spoon, cup, or glass was as intimate with them, as instinct with home feeling, as if it had a soul. Each defect or spot had its history, and a cracked dish or article of furniture received as tender and considerate medical treatment as if it were capable of understanding and feeling the attention. It was now a warm, spicy day in June, one of those which bring out the pineapple fragrance from the fir shoots, and cause the spruce and hemlocks to exude a warm, resinous perfume. The 2 sisters, for a wonder, were having a day to themselves, free from the numerous calls of the vicinity for 12 miles round. The room in which they were sitting was bestrewn with fragments of dresses and bonnets, which were being torn to pieces in a most wholesale way, with a view to a general rejuvenescence. A person of unsympathetic temperament, and disposed to take sarcastic views of life, might perhaps wonder what possible object these 2 battered and weather-beaten old bodies proposed to themselves in this process, whether Miss Roxy's gaunt black straw helmet, which she had worn defiantly all winter, was likely to receive much lustre from being pressed over and trimmed with an old green ribbon which that energetic female had colored black by a domestic recipe, and whether Miss Roxy's rusty bombazette would really seem to the world any fresher for being ripped and washed and turned, for the 2nd or 3rd time, and made over with every breadth in a different situation. Probably after a week of efficient labor, busily expended in bleaching, dyeing, pressing, sewing, and ripping, an unenlightened spectator, seeing them come into the meeting-house, would simply think, "There are those 2 old frights with the same old things on they have worn these 50 years." Happily, the Weird sisters were contentedly ignorant of any such remarks, for no duchesses could have enjoyed a more quiet belief in their own social position, and their semi-annual spring and fall rehabilitation was therefore entered into with the most simple-hearted satisfaction. "I'm a thinkin', Roxy," said Aunt Ruey, considerately turning on her hand an old straw bonnet, on which were streaked all the marks of the former trimming in lighter lines, which revealed too clearly the effects of wind and weather. "I'm a thinkin' whether or no this 'ere mightn't as well be dyed and done with as to try to bleach it out. I've had it 10 years last May, and it's kind o' losin' its freshness, you know. I don't believe these 'ere streaks will bleach out." "Never mind, Ruey," said Miss Roxy, authoritatively. "I'm goin' to do Mis' Badger's leg'orn, and it won't cost nothin', so hang your'n in the barrel along with it. The same smoke'll do 'em both. Mis' Badger she finds the brimstone, and next fall you can put it in the dye when we do the yarn." "That ar straw is a beautiful straw," said Miss Ruey, in a plaintive tone, tenderly examining the battered old headpiece. "I braided every stroke on it myself, and I don't know as I could do it agin. My fingers ain't quite so limber as they was. I don't think I shall put green ribbon on it agin, 'cause green is such a color to ruin, if a body gets caught out in a shower. There's these green streaks come that day I left my amberil at Captain Broad's and went to meetin'. Mis' Broad she says to me, 'Aunt Ruey, it won't rain.' And I says to her, 'Well, Mis' Broad, I'll try it, though I never did leave my amberil at home but what it rained.' And so I went, and sure enough it rained cats and dogs, and streaked my bonnet all up, and them ar streaks won't bleach out, I'm feared. How long is it Mis' Badger has had that ar leg'orn?" "Why, you know, the Cap'n he brought it home when he came from his voyage from Marseilles. That ar was when Phoebe Ann was born, and she's 15-year-old. It was a most elegant thing when he brought it, but I think it kind o' led Mis' Badger onto extravagant ways, for gettin' new trimmin' spring and fall so uses up money as fast as new bonnets. But Mis' Badger's got the money, and she's got a right to use it if she pleases, but if I'd a had new trimmin' spring and fall, I shouldn't a put away what I have in the bank." "Have you seen the straw Sally Kittridge is braidin' for Mara Lincoln's weddin' bonnet?" said Miss Ruey. "It's just the finest thing ever you did see, and the whitest. I was a tellin' Sally that I could do as well once myself, but my mantle was a fallin' on her. Sally don't seem to act a bit like a disapp'inted gal. She is as chipper as she can be about Mara's weddin', and seems like she couldn't do too much. But laws, everybody seems to want to be a doin' for her. Miss Emily was a showin' me a fine double damask tablecloth that she was goin' to give her, and Mis' Pennel, she's been a spinnin' and layin' up sheets and towels and tablecloths all her life, and then she has all Naomi's things. Mis' Pennel was talkin' to me the other day about bleachin' 'em out, 'cause they'd got yellow a lyin'. I kind o' felt as if 'twas unlucky to be a fittin' out a bride with her dead mother's things, but I didn't like to say nothin'." "Ruey," said Miss Roxy, impressively, "I hain't never had but jist one mind about Mara Lincoln's weddin'. It's to be, but it won't be the way people think. I hain't nussed and watched and sot up nights 60 years for nothin'. I can see beyond what most folks can. Her weddin' garments is bought and paid for, and she'll wear 'em. But she won't be Moses Pennel's wife, now you see." "Why, whose wife will she be, then?" said Miss Roxy, "'cause that ar Mr. Adams is married. I saw it in the paper last week when I was up to Mis' Badger's." Miss Roxy shut her lips with oracular sternness, and went on with her sewing. "Who's that comin' in the back door?" said Miss Ruey, as the sound of a footstep fell upon her ear. "Bless me!" she added, as she started up to look, "if folks ain't always nearest when you're talkin' about 'em. Why, Chapter 36 of The Pearl of Orr's Island. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget Gage. The Pearl of Orr's Island by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Chapter 36. The Shadow of Death. It was, in truth, Mara herself who came and stood in the doorway. She appeared overwearied with her walk, for her cheeks had a vivid brightness unlike their usual tender pink. Her eyes had, too, a brilliance almost painful to look upon. They seemed like ardent fires in which the life was slowly burning away. Sit down, little Mara," said Aunt Ruey. "Why, how like a picture you look this mornin'. One needn't ask you how you do. It's plain enough that you are pretty well." "Yes, I am, Aunt Ruey," she answered, sinking into a chair. "Only it is warm to day, and the sun is so hot, that's all, I believe. But I am very tired." "So you are now, poor thing," said Miss Ruey. "Roxy, where's my turkey feather fan? Oh, here 'tis. There, take it, and fan you, child, and maybe you'll have a glass of our spruce beer?" "Thank you, Aunt Roxy. I brought you some young wintergreen," said Mara, unrolling from her handkerchief a small knot of those fragrant leaves, which were wilted by the leaf. "Thank you, I'm sure," said Miss Ruey, in delight. "You always fetch something, Mara. Always would, ever since you could toddle. Roxy and I was just talkin' about your weddin'. I s'pose you're gettin' things well along down to your house. Well, here's the beer. I don't hardly know whether you'll think it worked enough, though. I said it Saturday afternoon, for all Mis' Twitchell said it was wicked for beer to work Sundays," said Miss Ruey, with a feeble cackle at her own joke. "Thank you, Aunt Ruey. It is excellent, as your things always are. I was very thirsty." "I s'pose you hear from Moses pretty often now," said Aunt Ruey. "How kind of providential it happened about his getting that property. He'll be a rich man now. And Mara, you'll come to grandeur, won't you? Well, I don't know anybody deserves it more. I railly don't. Mis' Badger was a sayin' so a Sunday, and Captain Kittridge, and all on 'em. I s'pose, though, we've got to lose you. You'll be going off to Boston, or New York, or somewhere." "We can't tell what may happen, Aunt Ruey," said Mara, and there was a slight tremor in her voice as she spoke. Miss Roxy, who beyond the first salutations had taken no part in this conversation, had from time to time regarded Mara over the tops of her spectacles with looks of grave apprehension, and Mara, looking up, now encountered one of these glances. "Have you taken the dock and dandelion tea I told you about?" said the wise woman, rather abruptly. "Yes, Aunt Roxy, I have taken them faithfully for 2 weeks past." "And do they seem to set you up any?" said Miss Roxy. "No, I don't think they do. Grandma thinks I'm better, and grandpa, and I let them think so. But, Miss Roxy, can't you think of something else?" Miss Roxy lay aside the straw bonnet which she was ripping, and motioned Mara into the outer room, the sink room, as the sisters called it. It was the scullery of their little establishment, the place where all dish-washing and clothes-washing was generally performed. But the boards of the floor were white as snow, and the place had the odor of neatness. The open door looked out pleasantly into the deep forest, where the waters of the cove, now at high tide, could be seen glittering through the trees. Soft moving spots of sunlight fell, checkering the feathery ferns and small piny tribes of evergreen, which ran in ruffling wreaths of green through the dry brown matting of fallen pine needles. Birds were singing and calling to each other merrily from the green shadows of the forest. Everything had a sylvan fullness and freshness of life. There are moods of mind when the sight of the bloom and freshness of nature affects us painfully, like the want of sympathy in a dear friend. Mara had been all her days a child of the woods. Her delicate life had grown up in them like one of their own cool shaded flowers, and there was not a moss, not a fern, not an upspringing thing that waved a leaf or threw forth a flower bell, that was not a well-known friend to her. She had watched for years its haunts, known the time of its coming and its going, studied its shy and veiled habits, and interwoven with its life each year a portion of her own. And now she looked out into the old mossy woods, with their wavering spots of sun and shadow, with a yearning pain, as if she wanted help or sympathy to come from their silent recesses. She sat down on the clean scoured door-sill and took off her straw hat. Her golden brown hair was moist with the damps of fatigue, which made it curl and wave in darker little rings about her forehead. Her eyes, those longing, wistful eyes, had a deeper pathos of sadness than ever they had worn before, and her delicate lips trembled with some strong suppressed emotion. Aunt Roxy," she said suddenly, "I must speak to somebody. I can't go on and keep up without telling some one, and it had better be you, because you have skill and experience, and can help me if anybody can. I've been going on for 6 months now, taking this and taking that, and trying to get better, but it's of no use. Aunt Roxy, I feel my life going just as steadily and as quietly every day as the sand goes out of your hourglass. I want to live. Oh, I never wanted to live so much, and I can't. Oh, I know I can't. Can I now? Do you think I can?" Mara looked imploringly at Miss Roxy. The hard-visaged woman sat down on the wash-bench, and covering her worn, stony visage with her checked apron, sobbed aloud. Mara was confounded. This implacably withered, sensible, dry woman, beneficently impassive in sickness and sorrow, weeping! It was awful, as if one of the Fates had laid down her fatal distaff to weep. Mara sprung up impulsively and threw her arms round her neck. "Now don't, Aunt Roxy, don't. I didn't think you would feel bad, or I wouldn't have told you. But oh, you don't know how hard it is to keep such a secret all to oneself. I have to make believe all the time that I am feeling well and getting better. I really say what isn't true every day, because, poor grandmamma, how could I bear to see her distress? And grandpapa, oh, I wish people didn't love me so. Why cannot they let me go? And oh, Aunt Roxy, I had a letter only yesterday, and he is so sure we shall be married this fall, and I know it cannot be." Mara's voice gave way in sobs, and the two wept together, the old grim gray woman holding the soft golden head against her breast with a convulsive grasp. "Oh, Aunt Roxy, do you love me too?" said Mara. "I didn't know you did." "Love ye, child?" said Miss Roxy. "Yes, I love ye like my life. I ain't one that makes talk about things, but I do. You come into my arms fust of anybody's in this world, and except poor little Hitty, I never loved nobody as I have you." "Ah, that was your sister, whose grave I have seen," said Mara, speaking in a soothing, caressing tone, and putting her little thin hand against the grim, wasted cheek, which was now moist with tears. "Just so, child. She died when she was a year younger than you be. She was not lost, for God took her. Poor Hitty, her life jest dried up like a brook in August, jest so. Well, she was hopefully pious, and it was better for her." "Did she go like me, Aunt Roxy?" said Mara. "Well, yes, dear, she did begin just so, and I gave her everything I could think of, and we had doctors for her far and near. But 'twasn't to be, that's all we could say. She was called, and her time was come." "Well, now, Aunt Roxy," said Mara, "at any rate it's a relief to speak out to some one. It's more than 2 months that I have felt every day more and more that there was no hope. Life has hung on me like a weight. I have had to make myself keep up and make myself do everything, and no one knows how it has tried me. I am so tired all the time I could cry, and yet when I go to bed nights I can't sleep. I lie in such a hot, restless way, and then before morning I am drenched with cold sweat, and feel so weak and wretched. I force myself to eat, and I force myself to talk and laugh, and it's all pretense, and it wears me out. It would be better if I stopped trying. It would be better to give up and act as weak as I feel. But how can I let them know?" "My dear child," said Aunt Roxy, "the truth is the kindest thing we can give folks in the end. When folks know jest where they are, why they can walk. You'll all be supported. You must trust in the Lord. I have been more'n 50 years with sick rooms and dyin' beds, and I never knew it fail that those that trusted in the Lord was brought through." "Oh, Aunt Roxy, it is so hard for me to give up hoping to live. There were a good many years when I thought I should love to depart. Not that I was really unhappy, but I longed to go to heaven, though I knew it was selfish, when I knew how lonesome I should leave my friends. But now, oh, life has looked so bright! I have clung to it so, I do now. I lie awake nights and pray, and try to give it up and be resigned, and I can't. Is it wicked?" "Well, it's natur' to want to live," said Miss Roxy. "Life is sweet, and in a general way we was made to live. Don't worry, the Lord'll bring you right when his time comes. Folks isn't always supported jest when they want to be, nor as they want to be, but yet they're supported fust and last. Ef I was to tell you how I has hope in your case, I shouldn't be a tellin' you the truth. I hasn't much of any, only all things is possible with God. If you could kind o' give it all up and rest easy in his hands, and keep a doin' what you can, why, while there's life there's hope, you know, and if you are to be made well, you will be all the sooner." "Aunt Roxy, it's all right. I know it's all right. God knows best. He will do what is best. I know that. But my heart bleeds and is sore, and when I get his letters, I got one yesterday, it brings it all back again. Everything is going on so well. He says he has done more than all he ever hoped. His letters are full of jokes, full of spirit. Ah, he little knows. And how can I tell him?" "Child, you needn't yet. You can jest kind o' prepare his mind a little." "Aunt Roxy, have you spoken of my case to any one? Have you told what you know of me?" "No, child, I hain't said nothin' more than that you was a little weakly now and then." "I have such a color every afternoon," said Mara. "Grandpapa talks about my roses, and Captain Kittridge jokes me about growing so handsome. Nobody seems to realize how I feel. I have kept up with all the strength I had. I have tried to shake it off, and to feel that nothing was the matter. Really, there is nothing much, only this weakness. This morning I thought it would do me good to walk down here. I remember times when I could ramble whole days in the woods, but I was so tired before I got halfway here that I had to stop a long while and rest. Aunt Roxy, if you would only tell grandpapa and grandmamma just how things are and what the danger is, and let them stop talking to me about wedding things. For really and truly I am too unwell to keep up any longer." "Well, child, I will," said Miss Roxy. "Your grandfather will be supported and hold you up, for he's one of the sort as has the secret of the Lord. I remember him of old. Why, the day your father and mother was buried he stood up and sung Old China, and his face was wonderful to see. He seemed to be standin' with the world under his feet and heaven opening. He's a master Christian, your grandfather is. And now you jest go and lie down in the little bedroom and rest you a bit, and by, in the cool of the afternoon, I'll walk along home with you." Miss Roxy opened the door of a little room, whose white fringy window curtains were blown inward by breezes from the blue sea, and laid the child down to rest on a clean, sweet-smelling bed with as deft and tender care as if she were not a bony, hard-visaged, angular female in a black mohair frisette. She stopped a moment wistfully before a little profile head, of a kind which resembles a black shadow on a white ground. That was Hitty, she said. Mara had often seen in the graveyard a mound inscribed to this young person, and heard traditionally of a young and pretty sister of Miss Roxy, who had died very many years before, but the grave was overgrown with blackberry vines, and gray moss had grown into the crevices of the slab which served for a tombstone, and never before that day had she heard Miss Roxy speak of her. Miss Roxy took down the little black object and handed it to Mara. You can't tell much by that, but she was a most beautiful creature. Well, it's all best as it is. Mara saw nothing but a little black shadow cast on white paper, yet she was affected by the perception how bright, how beautiful, was the image in the memory of that seemingly stern, commonplace woman, and how of all that was in her mind's eye she saw and remembered, she could find no outward witness but this black block. So some day my friends will speak of me as a distant shadow, she said, as with a sigh she turned her head on the pillow. Miss Roxy shut the door gently as she went out, and betrayed the unwonted rush of softer feelings which had come over her, only by being more dictatorial and commanding than usual in her treatment of her sister, who was sitting in fidgety curiosity to know what could have been the subject of the private conference. "I s'pose Mara wanted to get some advice about makin' up her weddin' things," said Miss Ruey, with a sort of humble quiver, as Miss Roxy began ripping and tearing fiercely at her old straw bonnet, as if she really purposed its utter and immediate demolition. "No, she didn't neither," said Miss Roxy, fiercely. "I declare, Ruey, you are silly. Your head is always full of weddin's, 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 nothin' else, from mornin' till night, and night till mornin'. I tell you there's other things have got to be thought of in this world besides weddin' clothes, and it would be well if people would think more o' gettin' their weddin' garments ready for the kingdom of heaven. That's what Mara's got to think of; for mark my words, Ruey, there is no marryin' and givin' in marriage for her in this world." "Why, bless me, Roxy, now you don't say so," said Miss Ruey. "Why, I knew she was kind o' weakly and ailin', but" "Kind o' weakly and ailin'?" said Miss Roxy, taking up Miss Ruey's words in a tone of high disgust. "I should rather think she was, and more'n that, too. She's marked for death, and that before long, too. It may be that Moses Pennel'll never see her again. He never half knew what she was worth. Maybe he'll know when he's lost her. That's one comfort." "But," said Miss Ruey, "everybody has been a sayin' what a beautiful color she was a gettin' in her cheeks." "Color in her cheeks?" snorted Miss Roxy. "So does a rock maple get color in September and turn all scarlet, and what for? Why, the frost has been at it, and its time is out. That's what your bright colors stand for. Hain't you noticed that little gravestone cough? Jest the faintest in the world, and it don't come from a cold, and it hangs on. I tell you, you can't cheat me. She's goin' jest as Mehitabel went, jest as Sally Ann Smith went, jest as Louisa Pearson went. I could count now on my fingers 20 girls that have gone that way. Nobody saw 'em goin' till they was gone." "Well, now, I don't think the old folks have the least idea on't," said Miss Ruey. "Only last Saturday Mis' Pennel was a talkin' to me about the sheets and tablecloths she's got out a bleachin', and she said that the weddin' dress was to be made over to Mis' Mosley's in Portland, 'cause Moses he's so particular about having things genteel." "Well, Master Moses'll jest have to give up his particular notions," said Miss Roxy, "and come down in the dust, like all the rest on us, when the Lord sends an east wind and withers our gourds. Moses Pennel's one of the sort that expects to drive all before him with a strong arm, and sech has to learn that things ain't to go as they please in the Lord's world. Sech always has to come to spots that they can't get over nor under nor round, to have their own way, but jest has to give right up square." "Well, Roxy," said Miss Ruey, "how does the poor little thing take it? Has she got reconciled?" "Reconciled! Ruey, how you do ask questions!" said Miss Roxy, fiercely pulling a bandana silk handkerchief out of her pocket, with which she wiped her eyes in a defiant manner. "Reconciled! It's easy enough to talk, Ruey, but how would you like it, when everything was going smooth and playin' into your hands, and all the world smooth and shiny, to be took short up? I guess you wouldn't be reconciled, that's what I guess." "Dear me, Roxy, who said I should?" said Miss Ruey. "I wa'n't blamin' the poor child, not a grain." "Well, who said you was, Ruey?" answered Miss Roxy in the same high key. "You needn't take my head off," said Aunt Ruey, roused as much as her adipose, comfortable nature could be. "You've been a talkin' at me ever since you came in from the sink room as if I was to blame, and snappin' at me as if I hadn't a right to ask civil questions, and I won't stan' it," said Miss Ruey. "And while I'm about it, I'll say that you always have snubbed me, and contradicted and ordered me around. I won't bear it no longer." "Come, Ruey, don't make a fool of yourself at your time of life," said Miss Roxy. "Things is bad enough in this world without two lone sisters and church members turnin' agin each other. You must take me as I am, Ruey. My bark's worse than my bite, as you know." Miss Ruey sank back pacified into her usual state of pillowy dependence. It was so much easier to be good-natured than to contend. As for Miss Roxy, if you have ever carefully examined a chestnut burr, you will remember that, hard as it is to handle, no plush of downiest texture can exceed the satin smoothness of the fibers which line its heart. There are a class of people in New England who betray the uprising of the softer feelings of our nature only by an increase of outward asperity. A sort of bashfulness and shyness leaves them no power of expression for these unwanted guests of the heart. They hurry them into inner chambers and slam the doors upon them, as if they were vexed at their appearance. Now, if poor Miss Roxy had been like you, my dear young lady, if her soul had been encased in a round, rosy, and comely body, and looked out of tender blue eyes shaded by golden hair, probably the grief and love she felt would have shown themselves only in bursts of feeling most graceful to see, and engaging the sympathy of all. But this same soul, imprisoned in a dry, angular body, stiff and old, and looking out under beetling eyebrows, over withered high cheek-bones, could only utter itself by a passionate tempest, unlovely utterance of a lovely impulse, dear only to him who sees with a father's heart the real beauty of spirits. It is our firm faith that bright solemn angels in celestial watchings were frequent guests in the homely room of the two sisters, and that passing by all accidents of age and poverty, withered skins, bony features, and grotesque movements and shabby clothing, they saw more real beauty there than in many a scented boudoir where seeming angels smile in lace and satin. "Ruey," said Miss Roxy, in a more composed voice, while her hard, bony hands still trembled with excitement, "this air's been on my mind a good while. I hain't said nothin' to nobody, but I've a seen it a comin'. I always thought that child wa'n't for a long life. Lives is run in different lengths, and nobody can say what's the matter with some folks, only that their threads run out. There's more on one spool and less on another. I thought, when we laid Hitty in the grave, that I shouldn't never set my heart on nothin' else. But we can't jest say we will or we won't. If we are to be sorely afflicted at any time, the Lord lets us set our hearts before we know it. This air's a great affliction to me, Ruey, but I must jest shoulder my cross and go through with it. I'm goin' down to night to tell the old folks, and to make arrangements so that the poor little lamb may have the care she needs. She's been a keepin' up so long, 'cause she dreaded to let 'em know." Chapter 37 of The Pearl of Orr's Island. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget Gage. The Pearl of Orr's Island by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Chapter 37. The Victory. Meanwhile, Mara had been lying in the passive calm of fatigue and exhaustion, her eyes fixed on the window, where, as the white curtain drew inward, she could catch glimpses of the bay. Gradually her eyelids fell, and she dropped into that kind of half-waking doze, when the outer senses are at rest, and the mind is all the more calm and clear for their repose. In such hours, a spiritual clairvoyance often seems to lift for a while the whole stifling cloud that lies like a confusing mist over the problem of life, and the soul has sudden glimpses of things unutterable which lie beyond. Then the narrow straits, that look so full of rocks and quicksands, widen into a broad, clear passage, and one after another, rosy with a celestial dawn, and ringing silver bells of gladness, the isles of the blest lift themselves up on the horizon, and the soul is flooded with an atmosphere of light and joy. As the burden of Christian fell off at the cross and was lost in the sepulchre, so in these hours of celestial vision, the whole weight of life's anguish is lifted and passes away like a dream, and the soul, seeing the boundless ocean of divine love, wherein all human hopes and joys and sorrows lie so tenderly upholden, comes and casts the one little drop of its personal will and personal experience with gladness into that fatherly depth. Henceforth with it, God and Saviour is no more word of mine and thine, for in that hour the child of earth feels himself heir of all things. All things are yours, and ye are Christ's, and Christ is God's. "The child is asleep," said Miss Roxy, as she stole on tiptoe into the room when their noon meal was prepared. A plate and knife had been laid for her, and they had placed for her a tumbler of quaint old engraved glass, reputed to have been brought over from foreign parts, and which had been given to Miss Roxy as her share in the effects of the mysterious Mr. Swadkins. Tea also was served in some egg-like India china cups, which saw the light only on the most high and festive occasions. "Hadn't you better wake her?" said Miss Ruey. "A cup of hot tea would do her so much good." Miss Ruey could conceive of few sorrows or ailments which would not be materially better for a cup of hot tea. If not the very elixir of life, it was indeed the next thing to it. "Well," said Miss Roxy, after laying her hand for a moment with great gentleness on that of the sleeping girl, "she don't wake easy, and she's tired, and she seems to be enjoying it so. The Bible says, 'He giveth his beloved sleep,' and I won't interfere. I've seen more good come of sleep than most things in my nursin' experience," said Miss Roxy, and she shut the door gently, and the two sisters sat down to their noontide meal. "How long the child does sleep!" said Miss Ruey, as the old clock struck 4. "It was too much for her, this walk down here," said Aunt Roxy. "She's been doin' too much for a long time. I'm a goin' to put an end to that. Well, nobody needn't say Mara hain't got resolution. I never see a little thing have more. She always did have, when she was the leastest little thing. She was always quiet and white and still, but she did whatever she sot out to." At this moment, to their surprise, the door opened, and Mara came in, and both sisters were struck with a change that had passed over her. It was more than the result of mere physical repose. Not only had every sign of weariness and bodily languor vanished, but there was about her an air of solemn serenity and high repose that made her seem, as Miss Ruey afterward said, like an angel just walked out of the big Bible. "Why, dear child, how you have slept, and how bright and rested you look!" said Miss Ruey. "I am rested," said Mara. "Oh, how much! And happy," she added, laying her little hand on Miss Roxy's shoulder. "I thank you, dear friend, for all your kindness to me. I am sorry I made you feel so sadly, but now you mustn't feel so any more. For all is well. Yes, all is well. I see now that it is so. I have passed beyond sorrow. Yes, forever." Soft-hearted Miss Ruey here broke into audible sobbing, hiding her face in her hands, and looking like a tumbled heap of old faded calico in a state of convulsion. "Dear Aunt Ruey, you mustn't," said Mara, with a voice of gentle authority. "We mustn't any of us feel so any more. There is no harm done. No real evil is coming, only a good which we do not understand. I am perfectly satisfied, perfectly at rest now. I was foolish and weak to feel as I did this morning, but I shall not feel so any more. I shall comfort you all. Is it anything so dreadful for me to go to heaven? How little while it will be before you all come to me. Oh, how little, little while!" "I told you, Mara, that you'd be supported in the Lord's time," said Miss Roxy, who watched her with an air of grave and solemn attention. "First and last, folks allers is supported. But sometimes there is a long wrestlin'. The Lord's give you the victory early." "Victory," said the girl, speaking as in a deep muse, and with a mysterious brightness in her eyes. "Yes, that is the word. It is a victory. No other word expresses it. Come, Aunt Roxy, we will go home. I am not afraid now to tell grandpapa and grandmamma. God will care for them. He will wipe away all tears." "Well, though, you mustn't think of goin' till you've had a cup of tea," said Aunt Ruey, wiping her eyes. I've kep' the teapot hot by the fire, and you must eat a little somethin', for it's long past dinner time." "Is it?" said Mara. "I had no idea I had slept so long. How thoughtful and kind you are!" "I do wish I could only do more for you," said Miss Ruey. "I don't seem to get reconciled no ways. It seems dreffle hard, dreffle! But I'm glad you can feel so." And the good old soul proceeded to press upon the child not only the tea, which she drank with feverish relish, but every hoarded dainty which their limited housekeeping commanded. It was toward sunset before Miss Roxy and Mara started on their walk homeward. Their way lay over the high stony ridge which forms the central part of the island. On one side, through the pines, they looked out into the boundless blue of the ocean, and on the other caught glimpses of Harpswell Bay as it lay glorified in the evening light. The fresh cool breeze blowing landward brought with it an invigorating influence, which Mara felt through all her feverish frame. She walked with an energy to which she had long been a stranger. She said little, but there was a sweetness, a repose, in her manner contrasting singularly with the passionate melancholy which she had that morning expressed. Miss Roxy did not interrupt her meditations. The nature of her profession had rendered her familiar with all the changing mental and physical phenomena that attend the development of disease and the gradual loosening of the silver cords of a present life. Certain well-understood phrases everywhere current among the mass of the people in New England strikingly tell of the deep foundations of religious earnestness on which its daily life is built. A triumphant death was a matter often casually spoken of among the records of the neighborhood, and Miss Roxy felt that there was a vague and solemn charm about its approach. Yet the soul of the gray, dry woman was hot within her, for the conversation of the morning had probed depths in her own nature of whose existence she had never before been so conscious. The roughest and most matter-of-fact minds have a craving for the ideal somewhere, and often this craving, forbidden by uncomeliness and ungenial surroundings from having any personal history of its own, attaches itself to the fortune of some other one in a kind of strange disinterestedness. Some one young and beautiful is to live the life denied to them, to be the poem and the romance. It is the young mistress of the poor black slave, the pretty sister of the homely old spinster, or the clever son of the consciously ill-educated father. Something of this unconscious personal investment had there been on the part of Miss Roxy in the nursling whose singular loveliness she had watched for so many years, and on whose fair virgin orb she had marked the growing shadow of a fatal eclipse. And as she saw her glowing and serene, with that peculiar brightness that she felt came from no earthly presence or influence, she could scarcely keep the tears from her honest gray eyes. When they arrived at the door of the house, Zephaniah Pennel was sitting in it, looking toward the sunset. "Why, really," he said, "Miss Roxy, we thought you must a run away with Mara. She's been gone almost all day." "I expect she's had enough to talk with Aunt Roxy about," said Mrs. Pennel. "Girls goin' to get married have a deal to talk about, what with patterns and contrivin' and makin' up. But come in, Miss Roxy, we're glad to see you." Mara turned to Miss Roxy and gave her a look of peculiar meaning. "Aunt Roxy," she said, "you must tell them what we have been talking about to day." And then she went up to her room and shut the door. Miss Roxy accomplished her task with a matter-of-fact distinctness to which her business-like habits of dealing with sickness and death had accustomed her, yet with a sympathetic tremor in her voice which softened the hard directness of her words. "You can take her over to Portland, if you say so, and get Dr. Wilson's opinion," she said, in conclusion. "It's best to have all done that can be, though in my mind the case is decided." The silence that fell between the three was broken at last by the sound of a light footstep descending the stairs, and Mara entered among them. She came forward and threw her arms round Mrs. Pennel's neck, and kissed her, and then turning, she nestled down in the arms of her old grandfather, as she had often done in the old days of childhood, and laid her hand upon his shoulder. There was no sound for a few moments but one of suppressed weeping. But she did not weep. She lay with bright, calm eyes, as if looking upon some celestial vision. "It is not so very sad," she said at last, in a gentle voice, "that I should go there. You are going too, and grandmamma. We are all going, and we shall be forever with the Lord. Think of it! Think of it!" Many were the words spoken in that strange communing, and before Miss Roxy went away, a calmness of solemn rest had settled down on all. The old family Bible was brought forth, and Zephaniah Pennel read from it those strange words of strong consolation, which take the sting from death and the victory from the grave. "And I heard a great voice out of heaven, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and Chapter 38 of The Pearl of Orr's Island. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget Gage. The Pearl of Orr's Island by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Chapter 38. Open Vision. As Miss Roxy was leaving the dwelling of the Pennels, she met Sally Kittridge coming toward the house, laughing and singing, as was her wont. She raised her long, lean forefinger with a gesture of warning. "What's the matter now, Aunt Roxy? You look as solemn as a hearse." "None o' your jokin' now, Miss Sally. There is such a thing as serious things in this 'ere world of ourn, for all you girls never seems to know it." "What is the matter, Aunt Roxy? Has anything happened? Is anything the matter with Mara?" "Matter enough. I've known it a long time," said Miss Roxy. "She's been goin' down for 3 months now, and she's got that on her that will carry her off before the year's out." "Pshaw, Aunt Roxy, how lugubriously you old nurses always talk! I hope now you haven't been filling Mara's head with any such notions. People can be frightened into anything." "Sally Kittridge, don't be a talkin' of what you don't know nothin' about. It stands to reason that a body that was bearin' the heat and burden of the day long before you was born or thought on in this world should know a thing or two more'n you. Why, I've laid you on your stomach and trotted you to trot up the wind many a day, and I was pretty experienced then, and it ain't likely that I'm a-goin' to take sass from you. Mara Pennel is a gal as has every bit and grain as much resolution and ambition as you have, for all you flap your wings and crow so much louder, and she's one of the close-mouth sort, that don't make no talk, and she's been a bearin' up and comin' to me on the sly for strengthen and things. She's took chamomile and orange peel and snake root and boneset and dash root and dandelion, and there hain't nothin' done her no good. She told me to-day she couldn't keep up no longer, and I've been a-tellin' Miss Pennel and her grand'ther. I tell you it has been a solemn time, and if you're goin' in, don't go in with none o' your light triflin' ways, 'cause as vinegar upon nitre is he that singeth songs on a heavy heart, the Scriptur' says." "Oh, Miss Roxy, do tell me truly," said Sally, much moved. "What do you think is the matter with Mara? I've noticed myself that she got tired easy, and that she was short-breathed, but she seemed so cheerful. Can anything really be the matter?" "It's consumption, Sally Kittridge," said Miss Roxy, "neither more nor less. That are is the long and the short. They're going to take her over to Portland to see Dr. Wilson. It won't do no harm, and it won't do no good." "You seem to be determined that she die," said Sally, in a tone of pique. "Determined, am I? Is it I that determines that the maple leaves shall fall next October? Yet I know they will. Folks can't help knowin' what they know, and shuttin' one's eyes won't alter one's road. I s'pose you think, 'cause you're young and middlin' good lookin', that you have feelin's and I hasn't. Well, you're mistaken, that's all. I don't believe there's one person in the world that would go farther or do more to save Mara Pennel than I would, and yet I've been in the world long enough to see that livin' ain't no great shakes neither. Ef one is hopefully prepared in the days of their youth, why, they escape a good deal, ef they get took cross lots into heaven." Sally turned away thoughtfully into the house. There was no one in the kitchen, and the tick of the old clock sounded lonely and sepulchral. She went upstairs to Mara's room. The door was ajar. Mara was sitting at the open window that looked forth toward the ocean, busily engaged in writing. The glow of evening shone on the golden waves of her hair, and tinged the pearly outline of her cheek. Sally noticed the translucent clearness of her complexion, and the deep burning color and the transparency of the little hands, which seemed as if they might transmit light like Sèvres porcelain. She was writing with an expression of tender calm, and sometimes stopping to consult an open letter that Sally knew came from Moses. So fair and sweet and serene she looked, that a painter might have chosen her for an embodiment of twilight, and one might not be surprised to see a clear star shining out over her forehead. Yet in the tender serenity of the face there dwelt a pathos of expression that spoke of struggles and sufferings past, like the traces of tears on the face of a restful infant that has grieved itself to sleep. Sally came softly in on tiptoe, threw her arms around her, and kissed her, with a half laugh, then bursting into tears, sobbed upon her shoulder. "Dear Sally, what is the matter?" said Mara, looking up. "Oh, Mara, I just met Miss Roxy, and she told me—" Sally only sobbed passionately. "It is very sad to make all one's friends so unhappy," said Mara, in a soothing voice, stroking Sally's hair. "You don't know how much I have suffered dreading it. Sally, it is a long time since I began to expect and dread and fear. My time of anguish was then when I first felt that it could not be possible that I should not live after all. There was a long time I dared not even think of it. I could not even tell such a fear to myself, and I did far more than I felt able to do to convince myself that I was not weak and failing. I have been often to Miss Roxy, and once, when nobody knew it, I went to a doctor in Brunswick. But then I was afraid to tell him half, lest he should say something about me, and it should get out. And so I went on getting worse and worse, and feeling every day as if I could not keep up, and yet afraid to lie down, for fear grandmamma would suspect me. But this morning it was pleasant and bright, and something came over me that said I must tell somebody. And so, as it was cool and pleasant, I walked up to Aunt Roxy's and told her. I thought, you know, that she knew the most, and would feel it the least. But, oh, Sally, she has such a feeling heart, and loves me so. It is strange she should." "Is it?" said Sally, tightening her clasp around Mara's neck, and then with a hysterical shadow of gaiety, she said, "I suppose you think that you are such a hobgoblin that nobody could be expected to do that. After all, though, I should have as soon expected roses to bloom in a juniper clump as love from Aunt Roxy." "Well, she does love me," said Mara. "No mother could be kinder. Poor thing, she really sobbed and cried when I told her. I was very tired, and she told me that she would take care of me, and tell grandpapa and grandmamma. That had been lying on my heart as such a dreadful thing to do. And she laid me down to rest on her bed, and spoke so lovingly to me. I wish you could have seen her. And while I lay there, I fell into a strange, sweet sort of rest. I can't describe it, but since then everything has been changed. I wish I could tell any one how I saw things then." "Do try to tell me, Mara," said Sally, "for I need comfort too, if there is any to be had." "Well, then, I lay on the bed, and the wind drew in from the sea, and just lifted the window curtain, and I could see the sea shining, and hear the waves making a pleasant little dash, and then my head seemed to swim. I thought I was walking out by the pleasant shore, and everything seemed so strangely beautiful, and grandpapa and grandmamma were there, and Moses had come home, and you were there, and we were all so happy. And then I felt a sort of strange sense that something was coming, some great trial or affliction, and I groaned and clung to Moses, and asked him to put his arm around me and hold me. Then it seemed to be not by our seashore that this was happening, but by the Sea of Galilee, just as it tells about it in the Bible, and there were fishermen mending their nets, and men sitting counting their money. And I saw Jesus come walking along, and heard him say to this one and that one, 'Leave all, and follow me.' And it seemed that the moment he spoke they did it, and then he came to me, and I felt his eyes in my very soul, and he said, 'Wilt thou leave all, and follow me?' I cannot tell now what a pain I felt, what an anguish. I wanted to leave all, but my heart felt as if it were tied and woven with 1,000 threads. And while I waited, he seemed to fade away, and I found myself then alone and unhappy, wishing that I could, and mourning that I had not. And then something shone out warm like the sun, and I looked up, and he stood there looking pitifully, and he said again, just as he did before, 'Wilt thou leave all, and follow me?' Every word was so gentle and full of pity, and I looked into his eyes and could not look away. They drew me, they warmed me, and I felt a strange, wonderful sense of his greatness and sweetness. It seemed as if I felt within me cord after cord breaking. I felt so free, so happy, and I said, 'I will, with all my heart.' And I woke then, so happy, so sure of God's love. I saw so clearly how his love is in everything, and these words came into my mind as if an angel had spoken them, 'God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes.' Since then I cannot be unhappy. I was so myself only this morning, and now I wonder that any one can have a grief when God is so loving and good, and cares so sweetly for us all. Why, Sally, if I could see Christ and hear him speak, I could not be more certain that he will make this sorrow such a blessing to us all that we shall never be able to thank him enough for it." "Oh, Mara," said Sally, sighing deeply, while her cheek was wet with tears, "it is beautiful to hear you talk, but there is one that I am sure will not and cannot feel so." "God will care for him," said Mara. "Oh, I am sure of it. He is love itself, and he values his love in us, and he never, never would have brought such a trial if it had not been the true and only way to our best good. We shall not shed one needless tear. Yes, if God loved us so that he spared not his own Son, he will surely give us all the good here that we possibly can have without risking our eternal happiness." "You are writing to Moses now?" said Sally. "Yes, I am answering his letter. It is so full of spirit and life and hope. But all hope in this world, all earthly, as much as if there was no God and no world to come. Sally, perhaps our Father saw that I could not have strength to live with him and keep my faith. I should be drawn by him earthward instead of drawing him heavenward, and so this is in mercy to us both." "And are you telling him the whole truth, Mara?" "Not all, no," said Mara. "He could not bear it at once. I only tell him that my health is failing, and that my friends are seriously alarmed, and then I speak as if it were doubtful in my mind what the result might be." "I don't think you can make him feel as you do. Moses Pennel has a tremendous will, and he never yielded to any one. You bend, Mara, like the little blue harebells, and so the storm goes over you, but he will stand up against it, and it will wrench and shatter him. I am afraid, instead of making him better, it will only make him bitter and rebellious." "He has a Father in heaven who knows how to care for him," said Mara. "I am persuaded. I feel certain that he will be blessed in the end, not perhaps in the time and way I should have chosen, but in the end. I have always felt that he was mine, ever since he came a little shipwrecked boy to me, a little girl, and now I have given him up to his Saviour and my Saviour, to his God and my God, and I am perfectly at peace. All will be well." Mara spoke with a look of such solemn, bright assurance as made her, in the dusky golden twilight, seem like some serene angel sent down to comfort, rather than a hapless mortal just wrenched from life and hope. Sally rose up and kissed her silently. "Mara," she said, "I shall come to-morrow to see what I can do for you. I will not interrupt you now. Good-by, dear." There are no doubt many who have followed this history so long as it danced like a gay little boat over sunny waters, and who would have followed it gaily to the end, had it closed with ringing of marriage bells, who turn from it indignantly when they see that its course runs through the dark valley. This, they say, is an imposition, a trick upon our feelings. We want to read only stories which end in joy and prosperity. But have we then settled it in our own mind that there is no such thing as a fortunate issue in a history which does not terminate in the way of earthly success and good fortune? Are we Christians or heathen? It is now 18 centuries since, as we hold, the highly favored among women was pronounced to be one whose earthly hopes were all cut off in the blossom, whose noblest and dearest in the morning of his days went down into the shadows of death. Was Mary the highly favored among women, and was Jesus indeed the blessed, or was the angel mistaken? If they were these, if we are Christians, it ought to be a settled and established habit of our souls to regard something else as prosperity than worldly success and happy marriages. That life is a success which, like the life of Jesus, in its beginning, middle, and close, has borne a perfect witness to the truth and the highest form of truth. It is true that God has given to us, and inwoven in our nature, a desire for a perfection and completeness made manifest to our senses in this mortal life, to see the daughter bloom into youth and womanhood, the son into manhood, to see them marry and become themselves parents, and gradually ripen and develop into the maturities of middle life, gradually wear into a sunny autumn, and so be gathered in fullness of time to their fathers. Such, one says, is the program which God has made us to desire, such the ideal of happiness which he has interwoven with our nerves, and for which our heart and our flesh crieth out, to which every stroke of a knell is a violence, and every thought of an earthly death is an abhorrence. But the life of Christ and his mother sets the foot on this lower ideal of happiness, and teaches us that there is something higher. His ministry began with declaring, "Blessed are they that mourn." It has been well said that prosperity was the blessing of the Old Testament, and adversity of the New. Christ came to show us a nobler style of living and bearing, and so far as he had a personal and earthly life, he buried it as a cornerstone on which to erect a new immortal style of architecture. Of his own he had nothing, neither houses nor lands, nor family ties, nor human hopes, nor earthly sphere of success, and as a human life it was all a sacrifice and a defeat. He was rejected by his countrymen, whom the passionate anguish of his love and the unwearied devotion of his life could not save from an awful doom. He was betrayed by weak friends, prevailed against by slanderers, overwhelmed with an ignominious death in the morning of youth, and his mother stood by his cross, and she was the only woman who God ever called highly favored in this world. This, then, is the great and perfect ideal of what God honors. Christ speaks of himself as bread to be eaten. Bread, simple, humble, unpretending, vitally necessary to human life, made by the bruising and grinding of the grain, unostentatiously having no life or worth of its own except as it is absorbed into the life of others and lives in them. We wished in this history to speak of a class of lives formed on the model of Christ, and like his, obscure and unpretending, like his, seeming to end in darkness and defeat, but which yet have this preciousness and value that the dear saints who live them come nearest in their mission to the mission of Jesus. They are made, not for a career and history of their own, but to be bread of life to others. In every household or house have been some of these, and if we look on their lives and deaths with the unbaptized eyes of nature, we shall see only most mournful and unaccountable failure, when, if we could look with the eye of faith, we should see that their living and dying has been bread of life to those they left behind. Fairest of these, and least developed, are the holy innocents who come into our households to smile with the smile of angels, who sleep in our bosoms, and win us with the softness of tender little hands, and pass away like the lamb that was slain before they have ever learned the speech of mortals. Not vain are even these silent lives of Christ's lambs. whom many an earth-bound heart has been roused to follow when the shepherd bore them to the higher pastures. And so the daughter who died so early, whose wedding bells were never rung except in heaven, the son who had no career of ambition or a manly duty except among the angels, the patient sufferers, whose only lot on earth seemed to be to endure, whose life bled away drop by drop in the shadows of the sick-room, all these are among those whose life was like Christ's in that they were made, not for themselves, but to become bread to us. It is expedient for us that they go away. Like their Lord, they come to suffer and to die. They take part in his sacrifice. Their life is incomplete without their death, and not till they are gone away does the Comforter fully come to us. It is a beautiful legend, which one sees often represented in the churches of Europe, that when the grave of the mother of Jesus was opened, it was found full of blossoming lilies, fit emblem of the thousand flowers of holy thought and purpose which spring up in our hearts from the memory of our sainted dead. Cannot many, who read these lines, bethink them of such rooms that have been the most cheerful places in the family, when the heart of the smitten one seemed the band that bound all the rest together, and have not there been dying hours which shed such a joy and radiance on all around, that it was long before the mourners remembered to mourn? Is it not a misuse of Chapter 39 of The Pearl of Orr's Island. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget Gage. The Pearl of Orr's Island by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Chapter 39. The Land of Beulah. It is now about a month after the conversation which we have recorded, and during that time the process which was to loose from this present life had been going on in Mara with a soft, insensible, but steady power. When she ceased to make efforts beyond her strength, and allowed herself that languor and repose which nature claimed, all around her soon became aware how her strength was failing, and yet a cheerful repose seemed to hallow the atmosphere around her. The sight of her every day in family worship, sitting by in such tender tranquillity, with such a smile on her face, seemed like a present inspiration. And though the aged pair knew that she was no more for this world, yet she was comforting and inspiring to their view as the angel who of old rolled back the stone from the sepulchre and sat upon it. They saw in her eyes, not death, but the solemn victory which Christ gives over death. Bunyan has no more lovely poem than the image he gives of that land of pleasant waiting which borders the river of death, where the chosen of the Lord repose, while shining messengers, constantly passing and repassing, bear tidings from the celestial shore, opening a way between earth and heaven. It was so, that through the very thought of Mara an influence of tenderness and tranquillity passed through the whole neighborhood, keeping hearts fresh with sympathy, and causing thought and conversation to rest on those bright mysteries of eternal joy which were reflected on her face. Sally Kittridge was almost a constant inmate of the brown house, ever ready in watching and waiting, and one only needed to mark the expression of her face to feel that a holy charm was silently working upon her higher and spiritual nature. Those great, dark, sparkling eyes, that once seemed to express only the brightness of animal vivacity, and glittered like a brook in unsympathetic gaiety, had in them now mysterious depths and tender, fleeting shadows, and the very tone of her voice had a subdued tremor. The capricious elf, the tricksy sprite, was melting away in the immortal soul, and the deep pathetic power of a noble heart was being born. Some influence sprung of sorrow is necessary always to perfect beauty in womanly nature. We feel its absence in many whose sparkling wit and high spirits give grace and vivacity to life, but in whom we vainly seek for some spot of quiet tenderness and sympathetic repose. Sally was, ignorantly to herself, changing in the expression of her face and the tone of her character, as she ministered in the daily wants which sickness brings in a simple household. For the rest of the neighborhood, the shelves and larder of Mrs. Pennel were constantly crowded with the tributes which one or another sent in for the invalid. There was jelly of Iceland moss sent across by Miss Emily, and brought by Mr. Sewell, whose calls were almost daily. There were custards and preserves, and every form of cake and other confections in which the housekeeping talent of the neighbors delighted, and which were sent in under the old superstition that sick people must be kept eating at all hazards. At church, Sunday after Sunday, the simple note requested the prayers of the church and congregation for Mara Lincoln, who was, as the note phrased it, drawing near her end, that she and all concerned might be prepared for the great and last change. One familiar with New England customs must have remembered with what a plaintive power the reading of such a note, from Sunday to Sunday, has drawn the thoughts and sympathies of a congregation to some chamber of sickness, and in a village church, where every individual is known from childhood to every other, the power of this simple custom is still greater. Then the prayers of the minister would dwell on the case, and thanks would be rendered to God for the great light and peace with which he had deigned to visit his young handmaid, and then would follow a prayer that when these sad tidings should reach a distant friend who had gone down to do business on the great waters, they might be sanctified to his spiritual and everlasting good. Then on Sunday noons, as the people ate their dinners together in a room adjoining the church, all that she said and did was talked over and over, how quickly she had gained the victory of submission, the peace of a will united with God's, mixed with harmless gossip of the sick chamber, as to what she ate and how she slept, and who had sent her gruel with raisins in it, and who jelly with wine, and how she had praised this and eaten that twice with a relish, but how the other had seemed to disagree with her. Thereafter would come scraps of nursing information, recipes against coughing, specifics against short breath, speculations about watchers, how soon she would need them, and long legends of other death-beds where the fear of death had been slain by the power of an endless life. Yet through all the gossip, and through much that might have been called at other times commonplace cant of religion, there was spread a tender earnestness, and the whole air seemed to be enchanted with the fragrance of that fading rose. Each one spoke more gently, more lovingly to each, for the thought of her. It was now a bright September morning, and the early frosts had changed the maples and the pine woods to scarlet, and touched the white birches with gold, when one morning Miss Roxy presented herself at an early hour at Captain Kittridge's. They were at breakfast, and Sally was dispensing the tea at the head of the table, Mrs. Kittridge having been prevailed on to abdicate in her favor. "It is such a fine morning," she said, looking out at the window, which showed a waveless expanse of ocean. "I do hope Mara has had a good night." "I'm a-goin' to make her some jelly this very forenoon," said Mrs. Kittridge. "Aunt Roxy was a-tellin' me yesterday that she was a-goin' down to stay at the house regular, for she needed so much done now." "It's most an amazin' thing we don't hear from Moses Pennel," said Captain Kittridge. "If he don't make haste, he may never see her." "There's Aunt Roxy at this minute," said Sally. In truth, the door opened at this moment, and Aunt Roxy entered with a little blue bandbox, and a bundle tied up in a checked handkerchief. "Oh, Aunt Roxy," said Mrs. Kittridge, "you are on your way, are you? Do sit down right here, and get a cup of strong tea." "Thank you," said Aunt Roxy, "but Ruey gave me a humming cup before I came away." "Aunt Roxy, have they heard anything from Moses?" said the Captain. "No, father, I know they haven't," said Sally. "Mara has written to him, and so has Mr. Sewell, but it is very uncertain whether he ever got the letters." "It's most time to be a-lookin' for him home," said the Captain. "I shouldn't be surprised to see him any day." At this moment Sally, who sat where she could see from the window, gave a sudden start and a half scream, and rising from the table darted first to the window and then to the door, whence she rushed out eagerly. "Well, what now?" said the Captain. "I am sure I don't know what's come over her," said Mrs. Kittridge, rising to look out. "Why, Aunt Roxy, do look! I believe to my soul that ar's Moses Pennel." And so it was. He met Sally as she ran out, with a gloomy brow and scarcely a look even of recognition, but he seized her hand and wrung it in the stress of his emotion, so that she almost screamed with the pain. "Tell me, Sally," he said, "tell me the truth. I dared not go home without I knew. Those gossiping, lying reports are always exaggerated. They are dreadful exaggerations. They frighten a sick person into the grave. But you have good sense and a hopeful, cheerful temper. You must see and know how things are. Mara is not so very, very—" He held Sally's hand and looked at her with a burning eagerness. "Say, what do you think of her?" "We all think that we cannot long keep her with us," said Sally. "And oh, Moses, I am so glad you have come." "It's false, it must be false," he said violently. "Nothing is more deceptive than these ideas that doctors and nurses pile on when a sensitive person is going down a little. I know Mara. Everything depends on the mind with her. I shall wake her up out of this dream. She is not to die. She shall not die. I come to save her." "Oh, if you could!" said Sally, mournfully. "It cannot be. It is not to be," he said again, as if to convince himself. "No such thing is to be thought of. Tell me, Sally, have you tried to keep up the cheerful side of things to her? Have you? Oh, you cannot tell, Moses, how it is unless you see her. She is cheerful, happy, the only really joyous one among us." "Cheerful, joyous, happy? She does not believe, then, these frightful things? I thought she would keep up. She is a brave little thing." "No, Moses, she does believe. She has given up all hope of life, all wish to live. And oh, she is so lovely, so sweet, so dear." Sally covered her face with her hands and sobbed. Moses stood still, looking at her a moment in a confused way, and then he answered, "Come, get your bonnet, Sally, and go with me. You must go in and tell her that I am come, you know." "Yes, I will," said Sally, as she ran quickly back to the house. Moses stood listlessly looking after her. A moment after she came out of the door again, and Miss Roxy behind. Sally hurried up to Moses. "Where's that black old raven going?" said Moses, in a low voice, looking back on Miss Roxy, who stood on the steps. "What, Aunt Roxy?" said Sally. "Why, she's going up to nurse Mara, and take care of her. Mrs. Pennel is so old and infirm, she needs somebody to depend on." "I can't bear her," said Moses. "I always think of sick rooms and coffins and a stifling smell of camphor when I see her. I never could endure her. She's an old harpy going to carry off my dove." "Now, Moses, you must not talk so. She loves Mara dearly, the poor old soul, and Mara loves her, and there is no earthly thing she would not do for her. And she knows what to do for sickness better than you or I. I have found out one thing, that it isn't mere love and good will that is needed in a sick room. It needs knowledge and experience." Moses assented in gloomy silence, and they walked on together the way that they had so often taken laughing and chatting. When they came within sight of the house, Moses said, "Here she came running to meet us. Do you remember?" "Yes," said Sally. "I was never half worthy of her. I never said half what I ought to," he added. "She must live. I must have one more chance." When they came up to the house, Zephaniah Pennel was sitting in the door, with his gray head bent over the leaves of the great family Bible. He rose up at their coming, and with that suppression of all external signs of feeling for which the New Englander is remarkable, simply shook the hand of Moses, saying, "Well, my boy, we are glad you have come." Mrs. Pennel, who was busied in some domestic work in the back part of the kitchen, turned away and hid her face in her apron when she saw him. There fell a great silence among them, in the midst of which the old clock ticked loudly and importunately, like the inevitable approach of fate. "I will go up and see her, and get her ready," said Sally, in a whisper to Moses. "I'll come and call you." Moses sat down and looked around on the old familiar scene. There was the great fireplace where, in their childish days, they had sat together winter nights, her fair, spiritual face enlivened by the blaze, while she knit and looked thoughtfully into the coals. There she had played checkers, or fox and geese with him, or studied with him the Latin lessons, or sat by, grave and thoughtful, hemming his toy ship sails, while he cut the molds for his anchors, or tried experiments on pulleys, and in all these years he could not remember one selfish action, one unlovely word. And he thought to himself, Chapter 40 of The Pearl of Orr's Island. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget Gage. The Pearl of Orr's Island by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Chapter 40 The Meeting. Sally found Mara sitting in an easy-chair that had been sent to her by the provident love of Miss Emily. It was wheeled in front of her room window, from whence she could look out upon the wide expanse of the ocean. It was a gloriously bright, calm morning, and the water lay clear and still, with scarce a ripple, to the far distant pearly horizon. She seemed to be looking at it in a kind of calm ecstasy, and murmuring the words of a hymn. "Nor wreck nor ruin there is seen, there not a wave of trouble rolls, but the bright rainbow round the throne peals endless peace to all their souls." Sally came softly behind her on tiptoe to kiss her. "Good morning, dear. How do you find yourself?" "Quite well," was the answer. "Mara, is there not anything you want?" "There might be many things, but his will is mine." "You want to see Moses?" "Very much, but I shall see him as soon as it is best for us both." "Mara, he is come." The quick blood flushed over the pale, transparent face, as a virgin glacier flushes at sunrise, and she looked up eagerly. "Come?" "Yes, he is below stairs wanting to see you." She seemed about to speak eagerly, and then checked herself and mused a moment. "Poor, poor boy," she said. "Yes, Sally, let him come at once." There were a few dazzling, dreamy moments when Moses first held that frail form in his arms, which but for its tender mortal warmth might have seemed to him a spirit. It was no spirit, but a woman whose heart he could feel thrilling against his own, who seemed to him like some frail, fluttering bird. But somehow, as he looked into her clear, transparent face, and pressed her thin little hands in his, the conviction stole over him overpoweringly that she was indeed fading away and going from him, drawn from him by that mysterious, irresistible power against which human strength, even in the strongest, has no chance. It is dreadful to a strong man who has felt the influence of his strength, who has always been ready with a resource for every emergency, and a weapon for every battle, when he first meets that mighty, invisible power by which a beloved life, a life he would give his own blood to save, melts and dissolves like smoke before his eyes. "Oh, Mara, Mara," he groaned, "this is too dreadful, too cruel. It is cruel." "You will think so at first, but not always," she said, soothingly. "You will live to see a joy come out of this sorrow." "Never, Mara, never. I cannot believe that kind of talk. I see no love, no mercy in it. Of course, if there is any life after death, you will be happy. If there is a heaven, you will be there. But can this dim, unsubstantial, cloudy prospect make you happy in leaving me and giving up one's lover? Oh, Mara, you cannot love as I do, or you could not. Moses, I have suffered, oh, very, very much. It was many months ago when I first thought that I must give everything up, when I thought that we must part. But Christ helped me. He showed me his wonderful love, the love that surrounds us all our life, that follows us in all our wanderings, and sustains us in all our weaknesses. And then I felt that whatever he wills for us is in love. Oh, believe it for my sake, for your own." "Oh, I cannot, said Moses. But as he looked at the bright, pale face, and felt how the tempest of his feelings shook the frail form, he checked himself. "I do wrong to agitate you so, Mara. I will try to be calm." "And to pray?" she said, beseechingly. He shut his lips in gloomy silence. "Promise me," she said. "I have prayed ever since I got your first letter, and I see it does no good," he answered. "Our prayers cannot alter fate." "Fate! There is no fate," she answered. "There is a strong and loving Father who guides the way, though we know it not. We cannot resist his will, but it is all love, pure, pure love." At this moment Sally came softly into the room. A gentle air of womanly authority seemed to express itself in that once gay and giddy face, at which Moses, in the midst of his misery, marveled. "You must not stay any longer now," she said. "It would be too much for her strength. This is enough for this morning." Moses turned away, and silently left the room, and Sally said to Mara, "You must lie down now and rest." "Sally," said Mara, "promise me one thing." "Well, Mara, of course I will." "Promise to love him and care for him when I am gone. He will be so lonely." "I will do all I can, Mara," said Sally, soothingly. "So now you must take a little wine and lie down. You know what you have so often said, that all will yet be well with him." "Oh, I know it, I am sure," said Mara. "But oh, his sorrow shook my very heart." "You must not talk another word about it," said Sally, peremptorily. "Do you know Aunt Roxy is coming to see you? I see her out of the window this very moment." And Sally assisted to lay her friend on the bed, and then, administering a stimulant, she drew down the curtains, and sitting beside her, began repeating, in a soft, monotonous tone, the words of a favorite hymn: "The Lord my shepherd is, I shall be well supplied, since he is mine, and I Chapter 41 of The Pearl of Orr's Island. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget Gage. The Pearl of Orr's Island by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Chapter 41. Consolation. Moses came down from the chamber of Mara in a tempest of contending emotions. He had all that constitutional horror of death and the spiritual world which is an attribute of some particularly strong and well-endowed physical natures, and he had all that instinctive resistance of the will which such natures offer to anything which strikes athwart their cherished hopes and plans. To be wrenched suddenly from the sphere of an earthly life, and made to confront the unclosed doors of a spiritual world on the behalf of the one dearest to him, was to him a dreary horror uncheered by one filial belief in God. He felt, furthermore, that blind animal irritation which assails one under a sudden blow, whether of the body or of the soul, an anguish of resistance, a vague, blind anger. Mr. Sewell was sitting in the kitchen. He had called to see Mara, and waited for the close of the interview above. He rose and offered his hand to Moses, who took it in gloomy silence, without a smile or word. "My son, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord," said Mr. Sewell. "I cannot bear that sort of thing," said Moses, abruptly, and almost fiercely. "I beg your pardon, sir, but it irritates me." "Do you not believe that afflictions are sent for our improvement?" said Mr. Sewell. "No, how can I? What improvement will there be to me in taking from me the angel who guided me to all good, and kept me from all evil, the one pure motive and holy influence of my life? If you call this the chastening of a loving Father, I must say it looks more like the caprice of an evil spirit." Have you ever thanked the God of your life for this gift, or felt your dependence on him to keep it? Have you not blindly idolized the creature and forgotten him who gave it? said Mr. Sewell. Moses was silent a moment. "I cannot believe there is a God," he said. "Since this fear came on me, I have prayed, yes, and humbled myself, for I know I have not always been what I ought. I promised if he would grant me this one thing, I would seek him in future. But it did no good. It's of no use to pray. I would have been good in this way, if she might be spared, and I cannot in any other." "My son, our Lord and Master will have no such conditions from us," said Mr. Sewell. "We must submit unconditionally. She has done it, and her peace is as firm as the everlasting hills. God's will is a great current that flows in spite of us. If we go with it, it carries us to endless rest. If we resist, we only wear our lives out in useless struggles." Moses stood a moment in silence, and then, turning away without a word, hurried from the house. He strode along the high rocky bluff, through tangled junipers and pine thickets, till he came above the rocky cove which had been his favorite retreat on so many occasions. He swung himself down over the cliffs into the grotto, where, shut in by the high tide, he felt himself alone. There he had read Mr. Sewell's letter, and dreamed vain dreams of wealth and worldly success, now all to him so void. He felt to-day, as he sat there and watched the ships go by, how utterly nothing all the wealth in the world was, in the loss of that one heart. Unconsciously, even to himself, sorrow was doing her ennobling ministry within him, melting off in her fierce fires trivial ambitions and low desires, and making him feel the sole worth and value of love. That which in other days had seemed only as one good thing among many, now seemed the only thing in life. And he who has learned the paramount value of love has taken one step from an earthly to a spiritual existence. But as he lay there on the pebbly shore, hour after hour glided by. His whole past life lived itself over to his eye. He saw 1,000 actions, he heard 1,000 words, whose beauty and significance never came to him till now. And alas, he saw so many when, on his part, the responsive word that should have been spoken, and the deed that should have been done, was forever wanting. He had all his life carried within him a vague consciousness that he had not been to-morrow what he should have been, but he had hoped to make amends for all in that future which lay before him. That future now, alas, dissolving and fading away like the white cloud islands which the wind was drifting from the sky. A voice seemed saying in his ears, "Ye know that when he would have inherited a blessing he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought it carefully with tears." Something that he had never felt before struck him as appalling in the awful fixedness of all past deeds and words, the unkind words once said, which no tears could unsay, the kind ones suppressed, to which no agony of wishfulness could give a past reality. There were particular times in their past history that he remembered so vividly, when he saw her so clearly, doing some little thing for him, and shyly watching for the word of acknowledgment, which he did not give. Some wilful, wayward demon withheld him at the moment, and the light on the little wishful face slowly faded. True, all had been 1,000 times forgiven and forgotten between them, but it is the ministry of these great vital hours of sorrow to teach us that nothing in the soul's history ever dies or is forgotten, and when the beloved one lies stricken and ready to pass away, comes the judgment day of love, and all the dead moments of the past arise and live again. He lay there musing and dreaming till the sun grew low in the afternoon sky, and the tide that isolated the little grotto had gone far out into the ocean, leaving long, low reefs of sunken rocks, all matted and tangled with the yellow hair of the seaweed, with little crystal pools of salt water between. He heard the sound of approaching footsteps, and Captain Kittridge came slowly picking his way round among the shingle and pebbles. "Wal, now, I thought I'd find ye here," he said. "I kind o' thought I wanted to see ye, ye see." Moses looked up half moody, half astonished, while the Captain seated himself upon a fragment of rock and began brushing the knees of his trousers industriously, until soon the tears rained down from his eyes upon his dry, withered hands. "Wal, now ye see, I can't help it, darned if I can. Knowed her ever since she's that high. She's done me good, she has. Mis' Kittridge has been pretty faithful. I've had folks here and there talk to me consid'able, but Lord bless you, I never had nothin' go to my heart like this 'ere. Why, to look on her there couldn't nobody doubt but what there was somethin' in religion. You never knew half what she did for you, Moses Pennel. You didn't know that the night you was off down to the Long Cove with Skipper Atkinson, that 'ere blessed child was a follerin' you, but she was, and she come to me the next day to get me to do somethin' for you. That was how your grand'ther and I got ye off to sea so quick, and she such a little thing then. That ar child was the savin' of ye, Moses Pennel." Moses hid his head in his hands with a sort of groan. "Wal, wal," said the Captain, "I don't wonder now ye feel so. I don't see how you can stan' it no ways, only by thinkin' o' where she's goin' to. Them ar bells in the Celestial City must all be a ringin' for her. There'll be joy that side o' the river, I reckon, when she gets acrost. If she'd jest leave me a hem o' her garden to get in by, I'd be glad. But she was one o' the sort that was jest made to go to heaven. She only stopped a few days in our world, like the robins when they's goin' south. But there'll be a good many fust and last that'll get into the kingdom for love of her. She never said much to me, but she kind o' drew me. If ever I should get in there, it'll be she led me. But come now, Moses, ye oughtn't fur to be a settin' here catchin' cold. Just come round to our house, and let Sally gin you a warm cup o' tea. Do come now." "Thank you, Captain," said Moses, "but I will go home. I must see her again to night." "Wal, don't let her see you grieve too much, ye know. We must be a little sort o' manly, ye know, 'cause her body's weak, if her heart is strong." Now Moses was in a mood of dry, proud, fierce, self-consuming sorrow, least likely to open his heart or seek sympathy from any one, and no friend or acquaintance would probably have dared to intrude on his grief. But there are moods of the mind which cannot be touched or handled by one on an equal level with us, that yield at once to the sympathy of something below. A dog who comes with his great, honest, sorrowful face, and lays his mute paw of inquiry on your knee, will sometimes open floodgates of sober feeling, that have remained closed to every human touch. The dumb simplicity and ignorance of his sympathy make it irresistible. In like manner the downright grief of the good-natured old Captain, and the childlike ignorance with which he ventured upon a ministry of consolation, from which a more cultivated person would have shrunk away, were irresistibly touching. Moses grasped the dry, withered hand, and said, "Thank you, Captain Kittridge. You're a true friend." "Wal, I be, that's a fact, Moses. Lord bless me, I ain't no great, I ain't nobody. I'm jest an old last year's mullein stalk in the Lord's vineyard. But that 'ere blessed little thing allers had a good word for me. She gave me a hymn book and marked some hymns in it, and read 'em to me herself, and her voice was jest as sweet as the sea of a warm evening. Them hymns come to me kind o' powerful when I'm at my work planin' and sawin'. Mis' Kittridge, she allers talks to me as ef I was a terrible sinner, and I s'pose I be; but this 'ere blessed child, she's so kind o' good and innocent, she thinks I'm good, kind o' takes it for granted I'm one o' the Lord's people, ye know. It kind o' makes me want to be, ye know." The Captain here produced from his coat pocket a much-worn hymn book, and showed Moses where leaves were folded down. "Now here's this 'ere," he said. "You get her to say it to you," he added, pointing to the well-known sacred idly which has refreshed so many hearts. "There is a land of pure delight, where saints immortal reign. Eternal day excludes the night, and pleasures banish pain. There everlasting spring abides, and never-fading flowers. Death like a narrow sea divides this happy land from ours. Now that ar beats everything, said the captain, and we must kind o' think of it for her, 'cause she's goin' to see all that, and ef it's our loss it's her gain, ye know. I know, said Moses, our grief is selfish. Jest so. Wal, we're selfish creatures, we be, said the captain, but arter all, 'tain't as if we was heathen and didn't know where they was a-goin' to. We just ought to be a-lookin' about and tryin' to foller 'em, ye know. Yes, yes, I do know, said Moses. It's easy to say, but hard to do. But law, man, she prays for you. She did years and years ago, when you was a boy and she a girl. You know it tells in the Revelations how the angels has golden vials full of odors which are the prayers of the saints. I tell ye, Moses, you ought to get into heaven, if no one else does. I expect you are pretty well known among the angels by this time. I tell ye what 'tis, Moses, fellers think it a mighty pretty thing to be a-steppin' high, and a-sayin' they don't believe the Bible and all that are, so long as the world goes well. This 'ere old Bible, why, it's jest like your mother. Ye rove and ramble, and cut up round the world without her a spell, and mebbe think the old woman ain't so fashionable as some. But when sickness and sorrow comes, why, there ain't nothin' else to go back to. Chapter 42 of The Pearl of Orr's Island. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget Gage. The Pearl of Orr's Island by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Chapter 42. Last Words. The setting sun gleamed in at the window of Mara's chamber, tinted with rose and violet hues from a great cloud castle that lay upon the smooth ocean over against the window. Mara was lying upon the bed, but she raised herself upon her elbow to look out. "Dear Aunt Roxy," she said, "raise me up and put the pillows behind me, so that I can see out. It is splendid." Aunt Roxy came and arranged the pillows, and lifted the girl with her long, strong arms. Then stooping over her a moment, she finished her arrangements by softly smoothing the hair from her forehead, with a caressing movement, most unlike her usual precise, business-like proceedings. "I love you, Aunt Roxy," said Mara, looking up with a smile. Aunt Roxy made a strange, wry face, which caused her to look harder than usual. She was choked with tenderness, and had only this uncomely way of showing it. "Law, now, Mara, I don't see how ye can. I ain't nothin' but an old burdock bush. Love ain't for me." "Yes, it is too," said Mara, drawing her down and kissing her withered cheek. "And you shan't call yourself an old burdock. God sees that you are beautiful, and in the resurrection everybody will see it." "I was always homely as an owl," said Miss Roxy, unconsciously speaking out what had lain like a stone at the bottom of even her sensible heart. "I always had sense to know it, and knew my sphere. Homely folks would like to say pretty things, and to have pretty things said to them, but they never do. I made up my mind pretty early that my part in the vineyard was to have hard work and no posies." "Well, you will have all the more in heaven. I love you dearly, and I like your looks, too. You look kind and true and good, and that's beauty in the country where we are going." Miss Roxy sprang up quickly from the bed, and turning her back, began to arrange the bottles on the table with great zeal. "Has Moses come in yet?" said Mara. "No, there ain't nobody seen a thing of him since he went out this morning." "Poor boy," said Mara, "it is too hard upon him. Aunt Roxy, please pick some roses off the bush from under the window and put in the vases. Let's have the room as sweet and cheerful as we can. I hope God will let me live long enough to comfort him. It is not so very terrible, if one would only think so, to cross that river. All looks so bright to me now that I have forgotten how sorrow seemed. Poor Moses, he will have a hard struggle, but he will get the victory too. I am very weak to-night, But to-morrow I shall feel better, and I shall sit up, and perhaps I can paint a little on that flower I was doing for him. We will not have things look sickly or deathly. There, Aunt Roxy, he has come in. I hear his step." "I didn't hear it," said Miss Roxy, surprised at the acute senses which sickness had etherealized to an almost spirit-like intensity. "Shall I call him?" "Yes, do," said Mara. "He can sit with me a little while to-night." The light in the room was a strange dusky mingling of gold and gloom when Moses stole softly in. The great cloud castle that a little while since had glowed like living gold from turret and battlement, now dim, changed for the most part to a sombre gray, enlivened with a dull glow of crimson, but there was still a golden light where the sun had sunk into the sea. Moses saw the little thin hand stretched out to him. "Sit down," she said. "It has been such a beautiful sunset. Did you notice it?" He sat down by the bed, leaning his forehead on his hand, but saying nothing. She drew her fingers through his dark hair. "I am so glad to see you," she said. "It is such a comfort to me that you have come, and I hope it will be to you. You know I shall be better to-morrow than I am to-night, and I hope we shall have some pleasant days together yet. We mustn't reject what little we may have because it cannot be more." "Oh, Mara," said Moses, "I would give my life if I could take back the past. I have never been worthy of you, never knew your worth, never made you happy. You always lived for me, and I lived for myself. I deserve to lose you, but it is none the less bitter." "Don't say lose. Why must you? I cannot think of losing you. I know I shall not. God has given you to me. You will come to me and be mine at last. I feel sure of it." "You don't know me," said Moses. "Christ does, though," she said, "and he has promised to care for you. Yes, you will live to see many flowers grow out of my grave. You cannot think so now, but it will be so. Believe me." "Mara," said Moses, "I never lived through such a day as this. It seems as if every moment of my life has been passing before me, and every moment of yours. I have seen how true and loving in thought and word and deed you have been, and I have been doing nothing but take. You have given love as the skies give rain, and I have drunk it up like the hot, dusty earth." Mara knew in her own heart that this was all true, and she was too real to use any of the terms of affected humiliation which many think a kind of spiritual court language. She looked at him and answered, "Moses, I always knew I loved most. It was my nature. God gave it to me, and it was a gift for which I give him thanks, not a merit. I knew you had a larger, wider nature than mine, a wider sphere to live in, and that you could not live in your heart as I did. Mine was all thought and feeling, and the narrow little duties of this little home. Yours went all round the world." "But oh, Mara! Oh, my angel! To think I should lose you when I am just beginning to know your worth. I always had a sort of superstitious feeling, a sacred presentiment about you, that my spiritual life, if ever I had any, would come through you. It seemed if there ever was such a thing as God's providence, which some folks believe in, it was in leading me to you, and giving you to me. And now to have all lashed, all destroyed, it makes me feel as if all was blind chance, no guiding God, for if he wanted me to be good, he would spare you." Mara lay with her large eyes fixed on the now faded sky. The dusky shadows had dropped like a black crape veil around her pale face. In a few moments she repeated to herself, as if she were musing upon them, those mysterious words of him who liveth and was dead. "Except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. If it die, it bringeth forth much fruit." "Moses," she said, "for all I know you have loved me dearly, yet I have felt that in all that was deepest and dearest to me I was alone. You did not come near to me, nor touch me where I feel most deeply. If I had lived to be your wife, I cannot say but this distance in our spiritual nature might have widened. You know, what we live with we get used to. It grows an old story. Your love to me might have grown old and worn out. If we lived together in the commonplace toils of life, you would see only a poor threadbare wife. I might have lost what little charm I ever had for you. But I feel that if I die, this will not be. There is something sacred and beautiful in death, and I may have more power over you, when I seem to be gone, than I should have had living." "Oh, Mara, Mara, don't say that." "Dear Moses, it is so. Think how many lovers marry, and how few lovers are left in middle life, and how few love and reverence living friends as they do the dead. There are only a very few to whom it is given to do that." Something in the heart of Moses told him that this was true. In this one day, the sacred revealing light of approaching death, he had seen more of the real spiritual beauty and significance of Mara's life than in years before, and felt upspringing in his heart, from the deep pathetic influence of the approaching spiritual world, a new and stronger power of loving. It may be that it is not merely a perception of love that we were not aware of before, that wakes up when we approach the solemn shadows with a friend. It may be that the soul has compressed and unconscious powers which are stirred and wrought upon as it looks over the borders into its future home. Its loves and its longings so swell and beat that they astonish itself. We are greater than we know, and dimly feel it with every approach to the great hereafter. It doth not yet appear what we shall be. "Now, I'll tell you what 'tis," said Aunt Roxy, opening the door. "All the strength this 'ere girl spends a talkin' to night will be so much taken out of the whole cloth to morrow." Moses started up. "I ought to have thought of that, Mara." "Ye see," said Moses, "she's been through a good deal to day, and she must be got to sleep at some rate or other to night. Lord, if he sleep he shall do well, the Bible says, and it's one of my best nussin' maxims." "And a good one, too, Aunt Roxy," said Mara. "Good night, dear boy. You see we must all mind Aunt Roxy." Moses bent down and kissed her, and felt her arms around his neck. "Let not your heart be troubled," she whispered. In spite of himself, Moses felt the storm that had risen in his bosom that morning soothed by the gentle influences which Mara breathed upon it. There is a sympathetic power in all states of mind, and they who have reached the deep secret of eternal rest have a strange power of imparting calm to others. It was in the very crisis of the battle that Christ said to his disciples, "My peace I give unto you," and they that are made one with him acquire like precious power of shedding round them repose, as evening flowers shed odors. Moses went to his pillow sorrowful. Chapter 43 of The Pearl of Orr's Island. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget Gage. The Pearl of Orr's Island by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Chapter 43 The Pearl. The next morning rose calm and bright, with that wonderful and mystical stillness and serenity which glorify autumn days. It was impossible that such skies could smile and such gentle airs blow the sea into one great waving floor of sparkling sapphires without bringing cheerfulness to human hearts. You must be very despairing indeed, when nature is doing her best, to look her in the face sullen and defiant. So long as there is a drop of good in your cup, a penny in your exchequer of happiness, a bright day reminds you to look at it, and feel that all is not gone yet. So felt Moses when he stood in the door of the brown house, while Mrs. Pennel was clinking plates and spoons as she set the breakfast table, and Zephaniah Pennel in his shirt sleeves was washing in the back room, while Miss Roxy came downstairs in a business-like fashion, bringing sundry bowls, plates, dishes, and mysterious pitchers from the sick-room. "Well, Aunt Roxy, you ain't one that lets the grass grow under your feet," said Mrs. Pennel. "How is the dear child this morning?" "Well, she had a better night than one could have expected," said Miss Roxy, "and by the time she's had her breakfast, she expects to sit up a little and see her friends." Miss Roxy said this in a cheerful tone, looking encouragingly at Moses, whom she began to pity and patronize, now she saw how real was his affliction. After breakfast Moses went to see her. She was sitting up in her white dressing gown, looking so thin and poorly, and everything in the room was fragrant with the spicy smell of the monthly roses, whose late buds and blossoms Miss Roxy had gathered for the vases. She seemed so natural, so calm and cheerful, so interested in all that went on around her, that one almost forgot that the time of her stay must be so short. She called Moses to come and look at her drawings and paintings of flowers and birds, full of reminders they were of old times, and then she would have her pencils and colors, and work a little on a bunch of red rock columbine that she had begun to do for him, and she chatted of all the old familiar places where flowers grew, and of the old talks they had had there, till Moses quite forgot himself, forgot that he was in a sick room, till Aunt Roxy, warned by the deepening color on Mara's cheeks, interposed her nursing authority that she must do no more that day. Then Moses laid her down, and arranged her pillows so that she could look out on the sea, and sat and read to her till it was time for her afternoon nap, and when the evening shadows drew on, he marveled with himself how the day had gone. Many such there were, all that pleasant month of September, and he was with her all the time, watching her wants and doing her bidding, reading over and over with a softened modulation her favorite hymns and chapters, arranging her flowers, and bringing her home wild bouquets from all her favorite wood haunts, which made her sick room seem like some sylvan bower. Sally Kittridge was there, too, almost every day, with always some friendly offering or some helpful deed of kindness, and sometimes they two together would keep guard over the invalid, while Miss Roxy went home to attend to some of her own more peculiar concerns. Mara seemed to rule all around her with calm sweetness and wisdom, speaking unconsciously only the speech of heaven, talking of spiritual things, not in an excited rapture or wild ecstasy, but with the sober certainty of waking bliss. She seemed like one of the sweet friendly angels one reads of in the Old Testament, so lovingly companionable, walking and talking, eating and drinking, with mortals, yet ready at any unknown moment to ascend with the flame of some sacrifice and be gone. There are those, a few at least, whose blessing it has been to have kept for many days, in bonds of earthly fellowship, a perfected spirit in whom the work of purifying love was wholly done, who lived in calm victory over sin and sorrow and death, ready at any moment to be called to the final mystery of joy. Yet it must come at last, the moment when heaven claims its own, and it came at last in the cottage on Orr's Island. There came a day when the room so sacredly cheerful was hushed to a breathless stillness. The bed was then all snowy white, and that soft, still, sealed face, the parted waves of golden hair, the little hands folded over the white robe, all had a sacred and wonderful calm, a rapture of repose that seemed to say, "It is done." They who looked on her wondered. It was a look that sunk deep into every heart. It hushed down the common cant of those who, according to country custom, went to stare blindly at the great mystery of death. For all that came out of that chamber smote upon their breasts and went away in silence, revolving strangely whence might come that unearthly beauty, that celestial joy. Once more, in that very room where James and Naomi Lincoln had lain side by side in their coffins, sleeping restfully, there was laid another form, shrouded and coffined, but with such a fairness and tender purity, such a mysterious fullness of joy in its expression, that it seemed more natural to speak of that rest as some higher form of life than of death. Once more were gathered the neighborhood, all the faces known in this history shone out in one solemn picture, of which that sweet restful form was the centre. Zephaniah Pennel and Mary his wife, Moses and Sally, the dry form of Captain Kittridge and the solemn face of his wife, Aunt Roxy and Aunt Ruey, Miss Emily and Mr. Sewell, but their faces all wore a tender brightness, such as we see falling like a thin celestial veil over all the faces in an old Florentine painting. The room was full of sweet memories, of words of cheer, words of assurance, words of triumph, and the mysterious brightness of that young face forbade them to weep. Solemnly Mr. Sewell read, "He will swallow up death in victory, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from off all faces, and the rebuke of his people shall he take away from off all the earth, for the Lord hath spoken it. And it shall be said in that day, Lo, this is our God, we have waited for him, and he will save us. This is the Lord, we have waited for him, we will be glad and rejoice in his salvation." Then the prayer trembled up to heaven with thanksgiving for the early entrance of that fair young saint into glory, and then the same old funeral hymn, with its mournful triumph, "Why should we mourn departed friends, or shake at death's alarms? 'Tis but the voice that Jesus sends to call them to his arms." Then in a few words Mr. Sewell reminded them how that hymn had been sung in this room so many years ago, when that frail, fluttering orphan soul had been baptized into the love and care of Jesus, and how her whole life, passing before them in its simplicity and beauty, had come to so holy and beautiful a close, and when, pointing to the calm, sleeping face, he asked, "Would we call her back?" there was not a heart at that moment that dared to answer "Yes." Even he that should have been her bridegroom could not at that moment have unsealed the holy charm, and so they bore her away, and laid the calm, smiling face beneath the soil, by the side of poor Dolores. "I had a beautiful dream last night," said Zephaniah Pennel, the next morning after the funeral, as he opened his Bible to conduct family worship. "What was it?" said Miss Roxy. "Well, ye see, I thought I was out a walkin' up and down, lookin' and lookin' for somethin' that I'd lost. What it was I couldn't quite make out, but my heart felt heavy as if it would break, and I was lookin' all up and down the sands by the seashore, and somebody said I was like the merchantman, seeking goodly pearls. I said I had lost my pearl of great price. And then I looked up, and far off on the beach, shining softly on the wet sands, lay my pearl. I thought it was Mara, but it seemed a great pearl with a soft moonlight on it, and I was running for it, when some one said, 'Hush!' and I looked and saw him a comin', Jesus of Nazareth, just as he walked by the Sea of Galilee. It was all dark night around him, but I could see him by the light that came from his face, and the long hair was hanging down on his shoulders. He came and took up my pearl and put it on his forehead, and it shone out like a star, and shone into my heart, and I felt happy. And he looked at me steadily, and Chapter 44 of The Pearl of Orr's Island. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget Gage. The Pearl of Orr's Island by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Chapter 44. 4 Years After. It was a splendid evening in July, and the sky was filled high with gorgeous tabernacles of purple and gold, the remains of a grand thunder shower which had freshened the air and set a separate jewel on every needle leaf of the old pines. 4 years had passed since the fair Pearl of Orr's Island had been laid beneath the gentle soil, which every year sent monthly tributes of flowers to adorn her rest, great blue violets, and starry flocks of ethereal eyebrights in spring, and fringy asters and goldenrod in autumn. In those days the tender sentiment which now makes the burial place a cultivated garden was excluded by the rigid spiritualism of the Puritan life, which, ever jealous of that which concerned the body, lest it should claim what belonged to the immortal alone, had frowned on all watching of graves as an earthward tendency, and enjoined the flight of faith with the spirit, rather than the yearning for its cast-off garments. But Sally Kittridge, being lonely, found something in her heart which could only be comforted by visits to that grave. So she had planted there roses and trailing myrtle, and tended and watered them, a proceeding which was much commented on Sunday noons, when people were eating their dinners and discussing their neighbors. It is possible good Mrs. Kittridge might have been much scandalized by it, had she been in a condition to think on the matter at all, But a very short time after the funeral she was seized with a paralytic shock, which left her for a while as helpless as an infant. And then she sank away into the grave, leaving Sally the sole care of the old captain. A cheerful home she made, too, for his old age, adorning the house with many little tasteful fancies unknown in her mother's days, reading the Bible to him, and singing Mara's favorite hymns, with a voice as sweet as the spring bluebird. The spirit of the departed friend seemed to hallow the dwelling where these two worshipped her memory in simple-hearted love. Her paintings, framed in quaint woodland frames of moss and pine cones by Sally's own ingenuity, adorned the walls. Her books were on the table, and among them many that she had given to Moses. "I am going to be a wanderer for many years," he said in parting. "Keep these for me until I come back." And so from time to time passed long letters between the two friends, each telling to the other the same story, that they were lonely, and that their hearts yearned for the communion of one who could no longer be manifest to the senses. And each spoke to the other of a world of hopes and memories buried with her, which, each so constantly said, no one could understand but you. Each, too, was firm in the faith that buried love must have no earthly resurrection. Every letter strenuously insisted that they should call each other brother and sister, and under cover of those names the letters grew longer and more frequent, and with every chance opportunity came presents from the absent brother, which made the little old cottage quaintly suggestive with smell of spice and sandalwood. But, as we said, this is a glorious July evening, and you may discern two figures picking their way over those low sunken rocks, yellowed with seaweed, of which we have often spoken. They are Mara and Sally going on an evening walk to that favorite grotto retreat, which has so often been spoken of in the course of this history. Moses has come home from long wanderings. It is 4 years since they parted, and now they meet and have looked into each other's eyes, not as of old when they met in the first giddy flush of youth, but as fully developed man and woman. Moses and Sally had just risen from the tea-table, where she had presided with a thoughtful, housewifely gravity, just pleasantly dashed with quaint streaks of her old merry wilfulness, while the old captain, warmed up like a rheumatic grasshopper in a fine autumn day, chirruped feebly, and told some of his old stories, which now he told every day, forgetting that they had ever been heard before. Somehow, all three had been very happy, the more so, from a shadowy sense of some sympathizing presence which was rejoicing to see them together again, and which, stealing soft-footed and noiseless everywhere, touched and lighted up every old familiar object with sweet memories. And so they had gone out together to walk towards the grotto where Sally had caused a seat to be made, and where she declared she had passed hours and hours, knitting, sewing, or reading. "Sally," said Moses, "do you know I am tired of wandering. I am coming home now. I want to begin a home of my own." This he said as they sat together on the rustic seat and looked off on the blue sea. "Yes, you must," said Sally. "How lovely that ship looks just coming in there." "Yes, they are beautiful," said Moses abstractedly, and Sally rattled on about the difference between sloops and brigs, seeming determined that there should be no silence, such as often comes in ominous gaps between two friends who have long been separated, and have each many things to say with which the other is not familiar. "Sally," said Moses, breaking in with a deep voice on one of these monologues, "do you remember some presumptuous things I once said to you in this place?" Sally did not answer, and there was a dead silence in which they could hear the tide gently dashing on the weedy rocks. "You and I are neither of us what we were then, Sally," said Moses. "We are as different as if we were each another person. We have been trained in another life, educated by a great sorrow. Is it not so?" "I know it," said Sally. "And why should we two, who have a world of thoughts and memories which no one can understand but the other, why should we, each of us, go on alone? If we must, why then, Sally, I must leave you, and I must write and receive no more letters, for I have found that you are becoming so wholly necessary to me that if any other should claim you, I could not feel as I ought." Must I go?" Sally's answer is not on record, but one infers what it was from the fact that they sat there very late, and before they knew it the tide rose up and shut them in, and the moon rose up in full glory out of the water, and still they sat and talked, leaning on each other, till a cracked, feeble voice called down through the pine trees above, like a hoarse old cricket, "Children, be you there?" "Yes, father," said Sally, blushing and conscious. "Yes, all right," said the deep bass of Moses. "I'll bring her back when I've done with her, Captain." "Wal, wal, I was gettin' consarned, but I see I don't need to. I hope you won't get no colds nor nothin'." They did not, but in the course of a month there was a wedding at the brown house of the old Captain, which everybody in the parish was glad of, and was voted without dissent to be just the thing. Miss Roxy, grimly approbative, presided over the preparations, and all the characters of our story appeared, and more, having on their wedding garments. Nor was the wedding less joyful, that all felt the presence of a heavenly guest, silent and loving, seeing and blessing all, whose voice seemed to say in every heart,